ready now, people? All right, I'd like to call the BCRUA meeting of January 22nd to order. Call the roll. Vice President Flores.
Here.
Secretary Shaw.
Here.
Director Kirkland.
Here.
Director Baker.
Here.
And Director Anderson.
Here.
Okay. All members are present. Now's the time when we'll call for citizen communication. Item 3. This is a time where you may address the board. We cannot deliberate, or we can ask some clarifying questions. And I have one person signed up to speak. That's Mr. Ben Trace.
Hello again. My name's Ben Treese. I live on North Rim, and I'm here tonight with many of my neighbors to continue our engagement and concern around the power line route. We have been respectively and deeply engaged in this process for nearly a year now, and we highlight this concern of ours at every board meeting. Tonight, I feel like I need to be a little bit disappointed because we have an agenda item specifically related to our neighborhood. Nothing has been shared. We don't know what's going to be presented. Can't ask any questions, can't talk about the agenda item. I couldn't even ask any rhetorical questions right now because I'm not quite sure what I should be asking. So when we first engaged, a lack of transparency and a shipping explanation was a point of frustration. So I hope this isn't a return to where we were nearly a year ago. I also hope this presentation is a start of a conversation and not the end. I'm sure that the board wants to be informed in this as much as we do, and we know that our elected officials, County Commissioner Doherty and State Representative Goodwin, wants to be involved in these discussions as well. So I look to the board to assure that the needed transparency, consideration, and community engagement occurs. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to address the board? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item 4A, consider approval of the BCRUA meeting minutes for November 20th, 2019. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
A motion?
Second.
And a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, call item 5A, consider an update and possible action regarding the FY 2018-2019 BCRUA financial audit.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Rebecca Goldstein, partner with the firm of Weaver and Tidwell, the board's auditor for the previous fiscal year that concluded September 30th, 2019. And with that, here's Rebecca.
Good evening. Thank you guys for having me. I think you all have a required communication letter that I'll just go through right now, and then I can also touch on some highlights of the financial statements and hopefully answer any questions you guys have. So you did hire Weaver to audit the financial statements for the year end 9/30/2019. And under professional standards, we are required to address the board and present the results. So the letter just kind of states under our responsibility is to form and express an opinion on the financial statements to make sure that they are fairly presented in all material respects. So we can't look at every single transaction that goes through. We do have a level of materiality that we look at. And just a reminder, our audit of the financial statements does not relieve management or the board of your responsibilities. So not that I needed to tell you that, but I do. So part of our responsibility is also to plan and perform our audit to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance, like I said. We do consider internal control when we do our audit, so we walk through the processes of putting the financial statements together and how the numbers get in the financial statements. But we don't issue an opinion on control. So we use that information to get a good idea of how comfortable we are with the numbers and the level of detail that we dig into for the numbers. We are responsible for communicating any significant matters that come up during the audit. We aren't responsible for digging into certain things that are outside the scope, but if we do find something that we feel like we need to share with you guys, we would definitely, and anything like that would be in this letter. The plan, scope, and timing of the audit is what we did communicate in the engagement letter. So we typically have an introduction meeting with Karen and Yannick, and then we do about 1 to 2 weeks of field work right after Thanksgiving. And then we go back to the office and we work on the report, and I think we provided management and the city's, the draft report, I think right before Christmas. And so we have some time to go back and forth and answer any questions, and then we issued the report on the 10th of January, I believe. Under compliance with ethical requirements, we are independent of BCRUA, so we are required to be independent in our role as auditor. If you look at the top of page 2, under the required communication, it does talk about non-attest services. Basically what that is anything that we do in addition to the audit itself. And what that is for you all is we actually prepare the financial statements. So that's just an added service that we provide. We are still required to be independent, but we do take the numbers that management gives us and draft the footnotes and put the numbers in the right buckets, if you will. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that management still makes all the decisions, that they provide someone with the requisite skills, knowledge, and assessment to help us do that. Management is still, has to evaluate and accept responsibility for the results, and they still have to maintain internal controls over that process. So basically, when we put the financial statements together, management's still responsible for looking at the numbers, obviously making sure they're correct, answering questions, which we did that process. It was a pretty thorough process. So, under qualitative aspects of the entity's significant accounting policies, we did note in the financials under note 2, the authority did adopt GASB 89 this year, which is accounting for interest costs incurred before the end of the construction period. It wasn't a big adjustment to the financials because honestly, what that says is you no longer have to capitalize interest when you are in the construction phase of a project. That interest wasn't material in years past, so it really didn't affect the financial statements for you all. But what that means is we don't have to, management doesn't have to do that analysis of that number every year to see if it is material to capitalize. So we did implement that. There were no other really significant unusual transactions to note. Under significant accounting estimates, if you look on your financials, really what we consider there as significant estimate is really just the depreciable lives of capital assets, because you do have such large capital assets on your books. When you're talking about depreciation, you look at how the useful life of that asset, and that's always an estimate, right? So we evaluate that every year along with management just to make sure that that's still a reasonable amount of time. Under the financial statement disclosures, everything was fine. We do just point out, we do consider significant disclosures when you look at your cash and cash equivalents and your long-term debt. So when you're looking at the financial statements, the notes themselves do provide a lot of additional information. At the bottom of page 2 and going to page 3 onto the letter, there were no significant difficulties encountered with management. We would be required to notify you all if there was. There were none of those. There were also no uncorrected or corrected misstatements. So what that means is when we got the numbers, of course there are some entries that management is making at year end to get the financial statements to the year end financials, right? But there was nothing that we found that said, hey, you missed this or this is significantly wrong. So if there were adjustments like that, we would be letting you all know that. There were no disagreements with management. We did ask management to provide a representation letter, which just means that we provide the letter template, and it says basically that they provided us everything that we asked for, that they didn't withhold information, that type of thing. Management's consultations with other accountants, there were no other significant matters or findings. Under non-compliance with laws and regulations, there was one small issue we found. At the end of the year, the cash deposits were under collateralized. It was basically a timing issue at year end. There was a deposit made after the cutoff date at 9:30, but the very next day, the cash was properly collateralized. So we are required to let you guys know that, but again, the next day the issue was corrected. And then on page 4 of the letter, other information and documents, that really just says, and if you read our opinion, that there's other information in addition to the basic financial statements, which is the management's discussion and analysis, and the supplementary information, which is the combining statements, the individual statements for all of the cities. We don't provide the same level of assurance on those, although I can tell you, we look at those numbers, we make sure that they agree to the financial statements. So we do provide what we call an in relation to opinion on those. The MD&A, we do look at that as well, where we recalculate those numbers and make sure those are correct as well. And then the last part on the modification of the auditor's report, you'll see in the opinion, and I believe it's on page 3, if you, yes, page 3 of the opinion. You'll see that we do have 2 emphasis of matter paragraphs in the opinion. We do note the change in accounting principle, which is just the adoption of GASB 89, which is the accounting for interest incurred before the end of the construction period. So anytime there's a new accounting pronouncement adopted, we typically will put that in the opinion just to highlight that, to make sure that the reader knows. And then we also talk about economic dependency, just because the BCRUA is dependent on the sponsor cities, Cedar Park, Round Rock, and Leander, for funding. Okay. So that is all of my required communications. If you all have any questions on the financial statements, I can go over them at a high level. I will tell you the management's discussion and analysis in the front is a good high level overview. It also provides a little bit of, because these aren't considered comparative financials, the MD&A does provide a look at the 18 to 19 results, so it's a good kind of year-to-year comparison. If you look on page 7, that kind of starts the financial highlights. So it does say that the partner city contributions were approximately $13 million this year. The net position of the utility authority increased by about $4.8 million. Capital assets went from, actually increased about $5.8 million. And then you have your non-current liabilities, which is mainly your debt, went from about $179.6 million to $188. That is really all I have, unless y'all have any questions on what's been provided or our process, anything I can answer for you all.
Does anyone have questions?
So I just want to make sure I understood the comment about the modified. It's not a modified opinion, it's just a note that GASB had changed, or that?
Yeah, it's, you're right, it's not, well, it is considered modified just in the fact, you have a clean opinion, so it's an, it's an unmodified opinion. There's an emphasis of matter paragraph, which all that says is there's some additional information in there that we feel that the readers need to know. But it is a clean opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's all.
Is there action we need to take, or?
My understanding is the board. Well, let me ask Robert, does the board need to take action on the item?
I think my recommendation would just be to a motion to accept the report, and hopefully that passes.
Okay. All right.
I'll make a motion to accept the report.
Okay, a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I accept the audit.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do want to thank you all for having me and thank management for working with us on the audit and the cities as well. They provide some good feedback, so it was a good process. Thank you.
Glad to hear you got along. Yeah. I like how you said that. I was like, can't imagine it would.
Yeah, I haven't actually had to report any disagreements with management. Nothing that rises to that level, so hopefully that doesn't happen.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, we'll call item 5B, consider an update regarding North Rim alternative electric routing evaluation.
Thank
Ms.
you,
Bondi.
Madam President. Well, in September, the board authorized staff to conduct a study on the North Rim alternative electrical routing evaluation as part of the Phase 2 Deepwater Intake Design Project. And we have now completed the study, and Aaron Archer from Walker Partners and I have a presentation on the results. No action is posted for today, and I can assure the audience that they will be seeing the presentation the same time the board is, because we have just completed it in time for this meeting. But I will gladly provide the presentation as soon as possible after this meeting so that you can look at it in more detail. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind stepping up to the podium. So we'll walk through the presentation, and you can ask questions as we go, or we can hold them to the end, however you would like. But I thought, because this topic has been on discussion with the board for quite some time, that we would start with a little bit of history, just to kind of frame the topic. So if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. So in this slide addresses the, goes back to when the preliminary engineering report that Aaron led was developed for this project. We, at that time, studied various alternatives to bring power to the pump station that was going to be part of the Phase 2 deep water intake project. There were 6 alternatives considered, and this diagram here shows that one of the alternatives considered was the State Highway 1431 alignment that we are going to be looking at in more detail today. However, with those 6 alternatives, the route that goes through the North Rim area was the one that was recommended. The 1431 option at that time cost $1 million more than the recommended alternative, and that didn't include land costs, and that is largely why it was recommended. So on the next slide, I guess fast forward to the end of December of 2017, a dialogue with the North Rim residents began with outreach from the HOA president. After meetings, there was a meeting out at North Rim that 30 residents attended. That was with the previous general manager here, but a lot of the other same folks were involved. What BCRUA offered at that time was to do an alternative alignment study. So this picture that you see shows the 3 options that were studied, and the North Rim alternative that basically goes the full length of the North Rim Drive is shown in green there, and the alternative Route 2 is the blue one, but that basically follows half of North Rim. Aaron, do you want to point out where that is? Basically, yeah.
7 route.
Yeah,
It
it's,
joins back up.
and that route actually already has 3-phase power. I guess it was feeding a pump station, a water pump station for the city of Jonestown. And then the alternative route, orange, I guess the very bottom one, it basically goes down that existing 3-phase that's parallel to North Rim, and then goes off to basically through the undeveloped area that is got some tough terrain and lots of trees. So once the study was completed, the results were provided to the HOA president. That was in August of 2018. So the next slide. Now we come to 2019. Of course, several months later, then we began a dialogue with the folks who are in the room today. I'm not sure how many were involved in the first study, but and leading to the point where this board authorized a new alternative alignment study in September. And so we studied 3 options. We looked at that same north rim option that had been studied in the previous study. That's the green route. And then we looked at the southern route, that is that blue area that comes along the existing three-phase south and parallel to North Rim Drive. But then it comes back up and continues to follow the three-phase in that eastern section of North Rim Drive. And then we added a more detailed analysis of the State Highway 1431 alignment, which is in the pink. So those, we had our consultants do a very detailed analysis of not only the routes and the electrical, but this time we added in looking at the cost of the easements that would be needed. And Aaron and I met with Pernaus Electric Co-op, who will ultimately own this, they reviewed the study, and they are supportive of our results for the three studies, three options. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, and then he can go into the details of what we learned from the study.
Okay. Thank you. I want to be real clear before I flip to the next slide that we understand the three routes, because on the North Rim green route and the southern blue route, there's some common portions of the route. Both of them, the southern route and the North Rim route, have the same alignment until you cross Sandy Creek. And then North Rim follows North Rim Drive all the way to Trails End Road. The southern route peels off and crosses Sandy Creek in a different location and follows an existing three-phase line till it connects back up on Lost Ridge, I believe, back up to North Rim Drive and continues over to Trails End Road. In the 1431 route, it's hard to see it at this scale, but it is following the north side of 1431. A subconsultant to Walker Partners that was working with PEC on that looked at various options to follow 1431, and the north side of 1431 was really the only viable option in their communication with PEC.
Aaron, can I ask a question before you move that? So is the number one, the North Rim, was that the proposed option under the first study?
Yes, that was the proposed or the recommended alternative under the first study. There's been, since that first study, a few tweaks in the alignment down in this location, but overall it's essentially the same alignment from the first study. And the southern route is also the exact same alignment from the first study.
And that was into 17-18 study? Is that when that was done?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So through coordination with PEC, also coordination with approved contractors that work with PEC, construction cost estimates were compiled for the three options. And looking at construction cost, you can see that, of course, as the length of the alignment increases, the cost increases as well. So construction cost for Route 1 North Rim were about $1.6 million. The southern route sits at about 1.8, and 1431 sits at about 2.4 million. And there is a bigger jump going from the southern route to 1431 as well, because on the 1431 route, roughly about a third of it, around 4,000 feet of that alignment, will have to be buried or underground rather than overhead, as it goes through the Treviso development in that location on the north side of the road. So that adds some additional cost on that alignment as well. Overall, the costs that are shown on this more detailed exercise versus some of the original costs done in 2016 and the follow-up work done in 2017, 2018 are very close. The delta between 1431 and the first route on North Rim remains close to about $1 million on a construction cost basis as well. An additional component of the study that went in this time that had not been looked at before was also the impact and the cost associated with easement acquisition. Overall, each of the three routes had a similar amount of easement acquisition involved in terms of the number of easements, in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 easements per route. But there's some very different costs associated with those, partially because The entire 1431 route is all new easements. There's no existing easements. And so while there's a similar number of easements, there's much more actual land acquisition involved with that route. 1431, also as those easement costs were put together, being a major roadway, that use along 1431 is for commercial, multifamily type properties, and so it is expensive land, as you might imagine, along 1431, which results when you total up construction and easement acquisition, and there is no cost shown here for other things like permitting or engineering. We're sticking really to construction and easements. About a $1.7 million difference from the North Rim alternative, and then the southern route is about $300,000 more than the original North Rim route. Any questions on the cost development?
Not with regards to cost, but do you have any estimates on time to do one versus the other route? I mean, just a duration?
The overall duration of the North Rim and the southern routes are pretty comparable. There's already infrastructure in place for most of those routes, which makes access to them relatively easy. 1431 significantly more difficult since there is no existing access roadway to construct it, and there's a bunch of underground construction associated with it. I have not asked the question from some of our contractors on the total duration, other than there is a difference with 1431 taking more time. So I wanted to talk a little bit.
Oh, okay, you're going there. I was going to ask.
can go
This
back.
is what I was going to ask, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. Looking at power line examples, this was an education for me, kind of working with some of our sub-consultants, getting to understand on the power side what different poles are. Starting in the lower left-hand corner, this is intended to give you kind of a relative sense of the size of some of these poles. There's terms that are thrown out there that are important to know when you're talking about power upgrades, understanding the difference between distribution lines and transmission lines. Transmission lines are what you see on the far right-hand corner. That is not the kind of facilities that we're talking about for this project. The lines that we're talking about for the project in most cases are a double circuit three-phase line, which is the second from the right with 2 crossbars on it. Through the overall alignment of the project, on the North Rim option, roughly maybe a half to 2/3 of that alignment is currently single-phase line that would be upgraded to a double circuit configuration. And the other third is an existing 3-phase line, which you can see adjacent to the single-phase pole. For the southern route, most of the southern route currently exists today as a single 3-phase line, so it'd be upgraded to a double circuit 3-phase line. And then on 1431, there's nothing that exists today on that. But this is just intended to give you kind of a sense of what we're talking about. There's no change in the voltage or the service being provided as a result of these upgrades. What's really happening in most cases is that there's another circuit being added to serve the BCRUA pump station. Also some examples. These are some renderings that were prepared of poles along North Rim Drive. In the left-hand photograph, you can see what's out there today in an existing 3-phase pole. So this is on the eastern end of North Rim Drive. And the photograph to the right, a rendering of what it would look like as a double circuit 3-phase pole. And likewise, an upgrade from a single phase to a double circuit 3-phase would be the difference in you see in these photos. The photo to the left is what's existing today for the western side of North Rim Drive.
I have a quick question. So if this were the option, would all the existing lines be moved, or would we have a double set of poles? I just want to make clarification of that.
Existing lines and existing poles would be removed. It'd
Okay.
be new poles and new lines. There wouldn't
Okay.
be anything that would be reused. Comm lines would be moved from those existing lines over to the new poles, which is a discussion. It's a good question. We've had that discussion with PEC a couple of times as well. The question was, would the existing poles remain in place after the project was constructed? And we have spoken with PEC several times on that particular issue, and they have committed to us that existing poles would be removed as part of the upgrade in the project, that those communication lines would be moved over to the new poles so that the existing poles would be removed and demolished. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. No, the poles that would go on North Rim, if, for example, the North Rim option was constructed so that, just for clarity, if this option was constructed that went the entire length of North Rim, all the poles on North Rim, whether they're an existing single-phase pole or they're an existing three-phase single-circuit pole, would be replaced with a double-circuit three-phase pole with the 2 crossbars. So that would.
I appreciate everyone's questions. I'm gonna have to ask that this is for information, and then keep your questions so that we can answer them at a later time, because this is the first time we're all getting this presentation, so I'm sure we all have questions.
I have a
It's not set
suggestion,
for discussion.
just let me if I can't say it. I think a town hall where, between y'all, for these type of questions, because I'm sure, I mean, I have questions that are not gonna be answered sitting here in 10, 15 minutes. I think that y'all should coordinate a town hall, that way concerns can be heard. I think communication will be key in this.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. We did go out and meet with them earlier when we were before we had scoped the study, so we're certainly available to have another meeting to show the details and answer any questions.
And I believe after the renderings, this was the last slide.
Could you go back to the rendering, Aaron, the second rendering? So just to clarify that under the alternative southern route, none of those current single-phase poles are changed. They remain like that. And the only thing that is changed is what's currently a three-phase, which is the previous, go to the previous rendering, is this. This is the only
correct.
change that happens with the alternative southern route.
That is correct.
And then just to reiterate that you mentioned that the necessary infrastructure like access is not currently present on the north of 1431. I think there was some communication we received from the residents saying, we'll put it on 1431, there's already poles there, but we would have to construct a whole new set.
We would need to move our new poles to the north side of the road where there's not currently existing infrastructure, create access roads, and put those in addition to building about a third of it is an underground duct bank at significant cost.
Okay.
There's no room on the existing power poles along 1431 for this infrastructure, and PEC has a policy that they won't allow 2 sets of poles with lines right next to each other.
It's a significant risk to their grid if they had 2 double circuit poles, so 4 circuits adjacent to each other along a major roadway in case there is a collision.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions, Board, from
I was
Mr.
just
Archer?
gonna point out that, Aaron, I don't know if this is true, but when the poles are upgraded and you upgrade the circuits on the poles, it'll also allow for more electrical capacity for the neighborhood there. Is that correct?
Who's not an electrician?
When the poles are upgraded on the double circuit option, one of the circuits is an express feeder that goes directly from the substation to BCRUA.ORG's plant. The other circuit's available to meet PEC's grid requirements. So that's available to people along the alignment. It's available to anybody in that area of the grid. So it improves PEC's overall system reliability to have that second 3-phase there. So purposes outside of the project.
I have a question, and it's not about money. Pole for pole, So I'm just gonna, some questions, concerns that I've heard is like, there's gonna be 10,000 new poles. Like somebody's got one pole in their front yard now, they're gonna have 5. Is there gonna be additional poles, or is it gonna be one for one?
When you go with a new, and I think that the renderings were put together in some attempt to show this. Let me move. When you move to a double circuit three-phase line, the spacing or the distance between the poles is tighter than when you have a single-phase line, because there's additional conductors on the poles.
So double.
Not double. The spacing is not double, but there is more poles for a triple circuit, for 2 circuits of three-phase than for a single phase. So there
Okay.
is a smaller
Gotcha.
distance between the poles.
What is, do you know the distance?
I'd have to go look it up. I don't know it
Okay.
offhand. That is a known number that we can get back to you, though.
What about the support wires?
The guying wires?
There's some pretty long ones out there already.
Guying
If you raise
wires,
a pole 15-something feet,
the guying requirements can be different and would normally take up more room. In some cases, the project does assume the use of engineered poles to reduce the need for additional guying.
Is that also true as far as the spacing when you're replacing the current three-phase with the double?
That's also true
It's the same
for that
thing.
upgrade. It would be not a significant change going from a three-phase to
Not as
a
much,
double
yeah.
circuit. And, you know, one of the things that happens a lot around PEC system is that there frequently are, when you do an upgrade like this, existing poles remain and carry communication lines, and those can linger for a while before communication companies come to move their infrastructure over so that that pole can be removed. And so PEC has committed to work with us on the upgrade so that when an upgrade is done on the project, communication lines would be moved over promptly and probably by PEC rather than waiting for the communication line companies to come deal with it at their convenience.
Couple questions, if you don't mind. On the different pole types, are the materials the same? Are they all wood in this scenario, or could they be steel, or what's the material type of the poles?
Generally, PEC would do a wood pole. For an engineered pole, it would not be a wood pole. They've got several alternatives that they use for a self-supporting engineered pole.
Okay. So I would be curious, you don't have to answer it now, but I'd be curious if there's some changes that would maybe improve the need or, you know, reduce the need for guides, regardless of the route question. I'd just be curious of that, is one thing. If you can maybe get that at some point. The second question I have is, by any chance, if you don't, I'd be interested in a map for all 3 routes that shows the number of properties impacted per route, so I can understand the number of homes, businesses, whatever impacted by each route, if that's possible.
Absolutely. We have something like that available that we can get for you. On the first question, that was an important question, is they went back into the evaluation. So when they looked at improvements along North Rim Drive in an effort to reduce easement impacts, especially from guying, they did assume the use of engineered poles when there was a need for a guying easement to support that pole with a change from a single-phase or a three-phase pole. And that's one of the reasons, if you look at the cost for the North Rim option that was originally prepared in 2017 and the cost this time around, it's gone up maybe on the range of about $200,000 or $300,000 because that was assumed, that was a change in the design approach.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So it's just an update. Well, I definitely want to thank everyone involved in this extra study, and also Representative Goodwin and Commissioner Doherty in their time to address this and have conversations. I'm just thankful for everyone that's been participating in this study, and thankful for y'all's time to come out and hear this presentation and get your questions answered. And we have had communications with Representative Goodwin and Commissioner Doherty as well, so they are aware of where we are and what our plans were. So, okay. All right. Call item 6A.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. Item 6A is a supplemental amendment for Walker Partners for the contract that is the Phase 2 Land Rights and Stakeholder Coordination Project. And what this supplemental amendment is for is related to improvements that are needed to, as we've been discussing, Pedernales Electric Co-op system, need to be completed for construction of the Phase 2 raw water delivery system. In fact, the temporary power needs to be in place just for the contractor to be able to construct the project. There isn't adequate power in the area where the tunnel and the pump stations are. And these improvements are not in North Rim. They are mainly on the east side of Trails End Road from FM 1431 down to the pump station site. This item requests board approval to add easement-related services to the land rights coordination project contract. This contract addresses all of the land rights related to the deep water intake. It was originally budgeted when the loan applications were made for about $2.5 million. So these contracts that you see coming along have always been anticipated, but in terms of timing with working out with PEC what easements are needed, this is really ripe at this time. The services under this supplemental amendment include support for acquisition of about 50 additional easements. Even though Pedernales Electric Co-op has easements, in some cases they just aren't adequate or never really were, maybe were adequate. But at this point, PEC, we've worked really closely with PEC and all the lawyers from the 3 cities to review each and every easement to determine which ones needed to be improved so that we could do the construction. And so we have about 50 additional easements and a handful of temporary construction easements. There's also support for any special commissioner hearings that might be needed. And so, more specifically, these services include land acquisition easements. We've got our Lori Bible, who handles all of our acquisitions here, and if we have any questions for her, all the agency and stakeholder coordination, and any design updates that would result from these easements. The contract is time and materials, not to exceed $498,590. It's time and materials because if we do have a special commissioner hearing, we won't necessarily know what the effort is. We've tried to put in an adequate budget, but we would certainly keep you informed if we determine that number not adequate. The contract would be funded by the 2018 SWIFT loan funds as well as the savings from the Phase 1A loans. And these, like I mentioned, these services have been budgeted and staff and the operating committee have reviewed the agreement and we recommend approval. And staff and Walker Partners are present and can respond to any questions you might have.
Board, do you have questions?
I do.
Okay.
Help me out. What's the 897 for? The construction phase services?
This is not, construction phase services are not in this one.
Not in this one?
This is just land acquisition, easements for the temporary power.
Okay.
Karen, I have a question, if I may. So, I think we discussed this, but just want to repeat it. These easements don't have any impact on our decision on the final routing of the power, correct? So this does
That's
not
right.
box us in on any of that decision-making, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a lot of numbers on here, so I just need to know which
Yeah.
one we're authorizing.
498.
The 498, okay, that's what I thought, but
So
it's already
here's,
budgeted.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So here's my issue. Leander's conducting a water study. We all know that. This was originally supposed to be on our agenda for October. Is that correct?
Well,
September, October?
we originally brought it to the board in June, and that was the last time you saw this scope.
So things have changed a little bit in Leander, and we are conducting a water study, our own water study. We've been going off of Round Rock water study from 2005. So Leander decided to do their own water study, so we have the data. No more he said, she said.
Okay, I'm gonna pause you right there, because you're kind of going off of what this agenda item
No, no.
actually is. I know you're giving background, but I think if, rather than
It's relevant.
giving too much
Yeah, it's
information.
relevant, because it was supposed to come before and it was over $1 million. And then it did not get on Leander's agenda. Mayor Hill didn't put it on the agenda. Communication broke down, and then so the board, or the BCRUA, split it up. And so basically, taking Leander City Council out of it. And that's my issues with it. Look, I'm all for, and you can ask Wayne and everybody else, I'm for parallel. But I'm not okay with voting around Leander City Council. I'm not going against them, because we're cutting it down to get it under $1 million.
Well, I would also like to mention that this is a long-term commitment, and as we've seen just in all these different presentations and discussions we've had, if we continue to delay things, the costs just keep going up.
Sure.
And then that gives people even more heartburn. But this is the long-term commitment. So I know we asked for a discussion or a presentation for people to get comfortable, but
I've asked for several.
as the board member, I feel it's your responsibility to have the information, take it to your council, so that they're, you know what I mean? Like, we've invested a lot, and we have people that are.
Sure. Did y'all take it to y'all's council? And your
everything's
council
done.
voted on it?
Every time.
Okay. Ours did not.
I really do appreciate that you guys are looking into other options, that seems to work for your city. However, for this, for the temporary power, because we've already approved the design phase, this is another one of those times I don't think that we can pause. I think beyond this, we might have some more discussions, but I think for today, I am gonna call a motion to consider the resolution authorizing the president to execute supplemental agreement number 9 with Walker Partners for Phase 2 land rights and stakeholder coordination project.
Motion to approve?
All those in favor?
Aye.
It needs a second.
Oh, sorry, I'll second it, thank you. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
A hard no.
Okay. All right, so resolution passes 2-1. We'll move on to item 6B.
Thank you, Madam President. This is ask the board to consider a resolution authorizing the president to execute an easement purchase agreement with Greg Atwood individually and as trustee Kimberly Atwood. This is an easement that is for the deepwater intake tunnel. That is a party that had 4 contiguous tracts of land owned by the Atwoods that we will need an easement across for the tunnel. Now, the tunnel is going to be bored, so this is really just a surface easement, and the property owners can still do what they want to on the land, except for they can't drill a well within the easement. These folks also have been working with us and have allowed us to put in a temporary groundwater monitoring well. We put in a groundwater monitoring well on a temporary easement. So this is, this total amount is 2.149 acres for the tunnel, and then 25 square feet for the monitoring well easement. The price is $54,306, And this easement is the largest tunnel easement being acquired on the project. And at about 2,000 linear feet represents about 25% of the overall intake tunnel. So it's a very important easement for us. Staff and the operating committee believe this is a fair price and recommend board approval. If the board would like to discuss any aspects of the price, we can go into executive session to talk about that as it's a real estate transaction. And staff is prepared to answer any questions you might have.
Board, do you have any questions, or do you need more information requiring an executive session? Okay. All right, have a motion?
Motion to approve as presented?
Have a second? I'll second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
All right. Resolution passes 2-1. Okay, I'll call for closing comments, item number 7. Director Anderson, do you have any closing comments?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Secretary Shaw,
No.
VP Flores.
No, thank you for coming out again, but we're working on it, so hopefully, I think as Ms. Bondi said, the presentation will be out somehow, some way shortly, so take a look at it. Thank you all for coming.
All right, Director Baker.
I just want to echo those sentiments. Thank you all for coming out. I know you had to take time out of your day, and I know it means a lot. I'm sure there's other things you'd rather be doing, but I know this is a priority, so thank you, and I look forward to your comments as we continue this review of this study. So thank you for being here.
Director Kirkland.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you to the board, to all the staff that are involved in this long-term project. It means a lot to the 3 cities, and we just thank you for attending tonight.
Okay, and I would like to thank everyone, and I feel good about where we are with the study, because I think a lot of the board was not here when the prior study was conducted, and having a lot of you come to us and email us and approach us, it's very difficult to kind of figure out how this impacts the project, our taxpayers, you all those pieces. So I feel like we have some good information to move forward with some more discussions and final decision. I'd also like to call for a future agenda item to look at, I guess maybe for the board itself and anyone that wants to sit in the audience and listen, just a timeline review of kind of where we are with the phases that are funding, not to go too far in the weeds, but we're having quite a few 2-1 votes, and this is a 3-city project, and I definitely want to get to a place where everyone understands the impacts, especially when it's a financial impact on our taxpayers as we delay things, as well as our partners that are working on this project. With that, anything else? All right, meeting's adjourned.